My name is Ethan Garvey, and I used to believe in fairy tales. Not the Disney kind with singing mice and pumpkin carriages, but the suburban American dream variety where hard work, loyalty, and love actually meant something. Where a man could build a life with his wife, raise kids in a safe neighborhood, and sleep soundly knowing tomorrow would be better than today. That belief lasted exactly 38 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in our picture-perfect subdivision outside Cleveland. October air carried that crisp promise of Halloween, and our neighbors on Autumn Drive were already planning the annual block party that had become legendary in our little corner of middle-class paradise. Tessa was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee from her favorite mug, the one that read Boss Lady in glittery pink letters. "Dean thinks we should do a haunted house theme this year," she said without looking up from her screen. "Something really elaborate. He has connections for professional decorations." Dean Pritchard, her business partner, the guy who'd been showing up in our conversations with increasing frequency over the past 3 months. I glanced at my wife of 12 years, noting how her face lit up whenever his name came up, and felt that familiar twist in my stomach that I'd been ignoring for weeks. "Since when did Dean become the block party coordinator?" I asked, keeping my tone light while I buttered my toast. Tessa finally looked up, and I caught something in her expression, a flicker of irritation that she quickly masked with her practiced smile. "He's just enthusiastic about community involvement, unlike some people who prefer to hide behind spreadsheets all day." The dig stung because it was designed to. As an operations manager for a logistics company, I spent my days solving problems, coordinating shipments, and keeping supply chains running smoothly. Not exactly glamorous work, but it paid well and kept our family comfortable. Apparently, that wasn't enough anymore. "Those spreadsheets pay for your boss lady mugs," I replied, then immediately regretted the sarcasm. We'd been having more of these little verbal sparring matches lately, each one leaving tiny wounds that never quite healed. Tessa's phone buzzed, and her attention snapped back to the screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing what looked like a novel-length response to whoever had messaged her. The smile that spread across her face wasn't one I'd seen directed at me in months. "I need to run," she announced, already standing and grabbing her purse. "Meeting with a potential client. Big social media campaign for a fitness brand." "Which client?" I asked, but she was already heading for the garage. "I'll tell you about it later. Love you." The words felt automatic, like she was reading them from a script. The garage door rumbled open, then closed, leaving me alone with my half-eaten toast and a growing sense that my carefully constructed world was developing cracks I couldn't ignore. My phone rang, interrupting my brooding. Mrs. Holman, my boss, had a knack for calling at precisely the wrong moments. "Ethan, we need to discuss the Morrison account. Can you be here early today?" "Of course. Give me 30 minutes. Work had always been my refuge, a place where problems had logical solutions and effort produced measurable results. Unlike marriage, apparently. The Morrison account was a mess of delayed shipments and angry customers, but I attacked it with the methodical precision that had earned me 3 promotions in 5 years. By lunch, I'd rerouted 2 trucks, negotiated with suppliers, and turned a potential disaster into a minor inconvenience. Mrs. Holman, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built our regional office from nothing, nodded approvingly as I presented my solution. "This is why I keep you around, Garvey. You see the whole picture while everyone else focuses on their little piece of the puzzle." If only I could apply that same clarity to my personal life. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I drove home through our subdivision, noting the Halloween decorations sprouting on every lawn like orange and black flowers. Our neighbors took their seasonal displays seriously, competing for the unofficial title of Most Creative House. Last year, the Hendersons had built a graveyard complete with fog machine and motion-activated skeleton. The year before, the Patels had turned their entire front yard into a haunted carnival. Our house looked bare by comparison. Tessa had been too busy with her expanding social media consulting business to bother with decorations, and I'd been too distracted by work to pick up the slack. Another small failure in the growing list of ways I was apparently disappointing my wife. The garage was empty when I arrived home. Tessa's car was still gone, though it was nearly 6 o'clock. I checked my phone for messages, but found nothing. This had become routine. Her late nights and mysterious meetings that always seemed to involve Dean and his expanding network of fitness industry contacts. I was heating up leftover pizza when my neighbor Kevin knocked on the back door. Kevin Martinez was one of the few genuine friends I'd made since we moved to Autumn Drive 5 years ago. A software engineer with a dry sense of humor and an impressive collection of craft beer, he was the kind of guy who noticed things other people missed. "Hey, stranger, haven't seen you around much lately." "Work's been crazy. Want a slice?" I gestured to the pizza box. Kevin accepted the food and settled into his usual spot at our kitchen island. "So, big plans for the block party? I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that your lovely wife is organizing something spectacular." "First I'm hearing about it, actually. Apparently Dean Pritchard is the mastermind behind this year's festivities." Kevin's expression shifted slightly, and he took a long sip of the beer I'd handed him. "Dean's certainly been making himself visible around here lately. Saw him jogging past my house this morning. Interesting route he takes." "What do you mean?" "Well, most people jog in loops or straight lines. Dean seems to favor a path that goes right past your house, multiple times, even when Tessa's car is gone." The pizza turned to cardboard in my mouth. Kevin wasn't one for idle gossip, which made his observation all the more unsettling. "Maybe he just likes our street." "Maybe." Kevin finished his beer and stood to leave. "Just keep your eyes open, man. Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to see clearly." After he left, I found myself standing at the kitchen window, looking out at our backyard where Tessa and I had hosted dozens of barbecues and birthday parties over the years. The swing set we'd installed for the kids who never came sat empty, another reminder of dreams that hadn't quite worked out the way we'd planned. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Running late. Don't wait up. Big breakthrough with the fitness client." 3 exclamation points. She only used multiple exclamation points when she was either genuinely excited or overcompensating for something. Given recent patterns, I suspected the latter. I spent the evening catching up on paperwork and trying not to think about Kevin's warning, but as I prepared for bed in our empty house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important, some crucial detail that would make everything else make sense. The answer came 3 days later, in the most mundane way possible. I was reviewing shipping manifests on our shared iPad when a photo notification popped up. Tessa had taken a picture at what looked like a restaurant, a selfie with someone whose face was cut off by the frame, but I could see enough of the background to recognize the distinctive brick wall and neon signs of Rossetti's, an upscale Italian place downtown. What caught my attention wasn't the location, though. It was the partial view of a tattoo on the arm wrapped around my wife's shoulders, a distinctive tribal design that I'd seen before during the neighborhood pool party last summer when Dean had shown off his gym-sculpted physique. I stared at the photo for a long time, my mind racing through explanations and excuses. Business dinner, group meeting, innocent celebration of a successful client presentation. But the way Tessa was leaning into that tattooed arm, the intimate angle of the shot, the soft lighting that suggested a romantic rather than professional atmosphere, none of it supported innocent explanations. I saved the photo to a separate folder and closed the iPad. Then I sat in my home office, surrounded by the trappings of my orderly, logical life, and accepted that my marriage was probably over. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The confrontation I'd been dreading came on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the restaurant photo incident. I'd been gathering evidence, not obsessively, just methodically, the way I approached problems at work. Screenshots of suspicious text message notifications, credit card statements showing charges at places Tessa claimed never to have visited. A pattern of lies that grew more elaborate each day. I wasn't planning to say anything that night. I was still processing, still hoping for some reasonable explanation that would restore my faith in the woman I'd married. But Tessa forced the issue by walking into our bedroom at 11:30, reeking of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. "Long meeting," I said, not looking up from my book. She paused in the doorway, and I could feel her calculating. Dean introduced me to some potential investors. We lost track of time. "At a bar? How did you—" She caught herself, but too late. "It was a casual networking thing. Sometimes business happens in relaxed environments." I set down my book and finally looked at her. Tessa was still beautiful at 35, with the kind of polished appearance that came from careful attention to diet, exercise, and skincare routines. But there was something different in her eyes now, a hardness that hadn't been there when we'd first met. "I found the photo," I said quietly. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, defiance, and finally a cold anger that took my breath away. "Which photo?" "The one from Rossetti's, with Dean's arm around you." Tessa sat on the edge of our bed, not bothering to deny it. So? That's your response?" "Ethan, we need to talk." Those 5 words that every married man dreads. I closed my book and gave her my full attention, though part of me wanted to run from whatever was coming next. "I'm not happy," she continued. "I haven't been happy for a long time. You're a good man, but you're not the right man for me anymore." "Because of Dean?" "Dean is just... he makes me feel alive again. He's confident, ambitious, exciting. He doesn't analyze everything to pieces or worry about every little detail." I felt like I was watching our marriage dissolve in real time, each word another shovelful of dirt on its grave. "So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about it?" I decided to find out what I was missing. Her voice was getting sharper, more defensive. "And what I found out is that I married someone who's too emotional, too needy, too focused on feelings instead of action. Too emotional." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent 12 years trying to be the husband she wanted. Supportive, communicative, present. Apparently those were character flaws. "I share my feelings because I thought that's what you wanted," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "Well, it's not. I want a man who takes charge, who makes decisions without endless discussions about how everyone feels about everything. Dean doesn't ask permission to live his life. Dean doesn't have a wife and responsibilities." "Exactly." Tessa stood up, her eyes bright with the fervor of someone who'd finally found the courage to speak their truth. "He's free to pursue what he wants. He's not weighed down by all this domestic nonsense." "This domestic nonsense is our life together." "No, Ethan, it's your life, and I'm tired of being trapped in it." She went to the bathroom and slammed the door, leaving me alone with the wreckage of everything I'd thought I knew about my marriage. I sat there for a long time, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. My wife didn't just want a divorce. She wanted to erase the version of me that I'd become, the caring, emotionally available husband who'd tried to build a partnership based on communication and mutual respect. In her mind, those qualities made me weak. The bathroom door opened, and Tessa emerged wearing the silk nightgown I'd bought her for our anniversary. For a moment, I thought she might be trying to salvage the conversation, to find some middle ground where we could work things out. Instead, she grabbed a pillow and headed for the door. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. I need space to think." "About us?" She paused in the doorway. "About what comes next?" After she left, I lay in our bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through the implications of everything she'd said. Too emotional, too needy, too focused on feelings. For years, I'd prided myself on being different from the stereotypical distant, uncommunicative husband. I'd read books about relationships, attended couples therapy sessions when we'd hit rough patches, made genuine efforts to understand and support my wife's dreams and ambitions. And apparently, all of that had been a mistake. The next morning, Tessa was gone before I woke up. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to help Dean with a client presentation. Back late." I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, then made coffee and tried to process the new reality of my situation. My wife was having an affair with a man who represented everything I wasn't. Impulsive, self-centered, emotionally unavailable. She'd made it clear that she preferred his approach to life over mine. Fine. If emotional availability was my fatal flaw, I could fix that. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching divorce lawyers, asset protection strategies, and custody laws. Not because I was ready to file papers, but because I needed to understand my options. Knowledge was power, and I was tired of feeling powerless. When Tessa came home that evening, she found me in the living room, reading. I looked up when she entered, but didn't speak. "How was your day?" she asked, seemingly surprised by my lack of questions about her whereabouts. "Fine." She waited for more, but I returned to my book. After a moment, she tried again. "I thought we could talk about last night. Maybe figure out—" "Nothing to figure out," I interrupted without looking up. "You were very clear about what you want." "Ethan, I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said. I'm too emotional, too needy, too focused on feelings, message received." I could feel her staring at me, trying to read my expression, but I kept my face neutral, my attention apparently focused on the pages in front of me. "I'm going to make dinner," she said finally. I already ate. It was a lie, but I wasn't hungry anyway. And more importantly, I was beginning to understand the power of emotional withdrawal. For 12 years, I'd been an open book, sharing every thought and feeling, seeking her input on every decision. It had made me predictable, boring, taken for granted. That version of Ethan was gone. Over the following days, I implemented what I privately called the Dean strategy. I stopped asking about Tessa's schedule, stopped sharing details about my work, stopped initiating conversations about our relationship or future plans. When she spoke, I listened politely, but without the intense engagement she'd grown accustomed to. The change was subtle but profound. Instead of the emotional, needy husband she'd criticized, I became cordial but distant, available but not eager, present but not invested, and it was driving her crazy. "You're being weird," she announced one evening, finding me in my home office working on what looked like budget spreadsheets but was actually research into our joint financial accounts. "How so? You're not you. You don't ask questions, you don't want to talk about things, you act like you don't care about anything." I looked up from my laptop, meeting her eyes with the neutral expression I'd been practicing. "I thought you wanted a man who didn't need endless discussions about feelings. I didn't mean you should become a robot. What did you mean exactly?" She struggled for an answer, and I realized she hadn't thought through the implications of her criticism. She'd wanted me to be different, but hadn't considered what that difference might look like in practice. I don't know what I meant, but this isn't it." I returned to my laptop. "I'm just giving you the space you said you needed to think about what comes next." That night, she didn't sleep in the guest room. She came to bed at her usual time, but I was already asleep, or pretending to be. When she tried to initiate a conversation, I mumbled something about being tired and rolled away from her. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. 3 weeks into my emotional withdrawal experiment, I discovered the true scope of Tessa's betrayal. It happened by accident, the way most life-changing revelations do, through a combination of coincidence and careful observation. I was at the bank, depositing a work bonus check, when the teller mentioned an unusual withdrawal from our joint savings account. "Just wanted to confirm this was authorized," she said, showing me a transaction slip. "Your wife took out $8,000 yesterday. Cash withdrawal. That's quite a bit." $8,000. Tessa hadn't mentioned needing cash for anything, and we typically discussed large expenditures. I thanked the teller and asked for a complete statement of recent account activity. What I found made my stomach turn. Over the past 2 months, Tessa had been systematically draining our savings. Small withdrawals at first, $500 here, $1,000 there, but escalating to larger amounts. The $8,000 withdrawal was just the latest in a series of transfers that had reduced our emergency fund by nearly $30,000. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, staring at the statements and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. $30,000 doesn't just disappear, it goes somewhere, for something, to someone. That evening, I waited until Tessa was in the shower, then checked her laptop. She'd left her email open, and it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The correspondence with Dean was extensive and damning. Not just the usual affair-related messages I'd expected, but detailed discussions about their future together. Plans to rent an apartment downtown, talk of starting a fitness consulting business, references to getting rid of the unnecessary baggage, and making a clean break. But the most devastating email was from 3 days ago. "Baby, I found the perfect place. 2-bedroom loft in the Arts District. First month last month, and security deposit comes to exactly $8,000. Once we get E out of the house, we can move fast. My lawyer says if we play this right, you can claim emotional abandonment and get the house in the settlement. Then we'll have everything we need to start over." I read the email 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of betrayal. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning my complete destruction. The house I'd worked overtime to afford, the savings I'd carefully accumulated, the life I'd built, all of it was just raw material for their fresh start. The shower was still running. I forwarded the email chain to my personal account, then cleared the browser history and closed the laptop. By the time Tessa emerged from the bathroom, I was in bed reading. "You're up late," she observed, toweling her hair. "Couldn't sleep." She climbed into bed beside me, and for a moment I thought she might try to initiate intimacy. Instead, she rolled onto her side, facing away from me. "Ethan, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "With your life, with us, with the way things are." I considered my answer carefully. 3 weeks ago, I would have poured out my heart, shared my fears and hopes, tried to bridge the growing gap between us. But that was the old Ethan, the emotional, needy one she'd rejected. "I'm content," I said finally. "Content isn't the same as happy." "No, it's not, but it's more sustainable." She was quiet for a long time, and I thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she spoke again, her voice small in the darkness. "I miss talking to you." "We're talking now." "You know what I mean. Real talking. The way we used to." "The way we used to made me too emotional, remember?" Another long silence. Then, maybe I was wrong about that. But it was too late for maybe. I'd seen the emails, knew about the money, understood the full scope of her plans. Whatever regret she was feeling now was just nostalgia for the comfortable life she was preparing to abandon. Get some sleep, I said, turning off my bedside lamp. Tomorrow's a busy day. I wasn't lying about that. I had calls to make, meetings to arrange, strategies to implement. If Tessa and Dean wanted to play games with my life, they were about to discover that I was better at this than they'd anticipated. The next morning, I took a personal day and drove to downtown Cleveland to meet with Patricia Vance, the divorce attorney I'd researched. She was a sharp woman in her 40s with a reputation for protecting men's assets in contested divorces. Based on what you've told me, she said after reviewing the emails and bank statements, your wife is positioning herself for a favorable settlement by creating a narrative of emotional abandonment. The money she's taken could be characterized as preparation for leaving an unhappy marriage. Can I get it back? Possibly. But more importantly, we can protect what's left and ensure she doesn't get rewarded for her deception. Ohio is a no-fault state, but adultery and financial misconduct still matter in asset division. I signed a retainer agreement and left her office feeling more optimistic than I had in weeks. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was taking action instead of just reacting. My next stop was the office of a private investigator Patricia had recommended. James Chen was a former police detective who specialized in marital cases, and he listened to my story with the detached professionalism of someone who'd heard it all before. Documentation is key, he explained. We need to establish a clear pattern of adultery and financial deception. Photos, recordings, witnesses. The more evidence we have, the stronger your position. How long will that take? Depends on how careful they're being. But based on what you've described, they're not being careful at all. Give me 2 weeks. I drove home feeling like I'd finally started fighting back instead of just absorbing punishment. The old Ethan would have confronted Tessa directly, demanded explanations, tried to work things out through honest communication. But honest communication only works when both parties are being honest. Tessa was in the kitchen when I arrived, preparing what looked like an elaborate dinner. She'd changed clothes since morning, trading her casual jeans for a dress I hadn't seen her wear in months. You look nice, I observed. I thought we could have a romantic evening, just the two of us, like old times. She'd prepared my favorite meal, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, and opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. The table was set with our good china, candles flickering between us. It was a lovely gesture. It was also 3 weeks too late. This is nice, I said, taking my seat. What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to cook for my husband? You haven't cooked in 2 months? She flinched slightly at the observation, but recovered quickly. I've been busy with work, but I realized I've been neglecting what's important. We ate in relative silence, Tessa making occasional attempts at conversation that I responded to politely but without enthusiasm. I could see her growing frustrated with my lack of engagement, but I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. I've been thinking about what you said, she announced over dessert, about being too emotional. Have you? I think I was unfair. You're not too emotional. You're thoughtful, considerate. Those are good qualities in a husband, but not exciting ones. Excitement isn't everything. I met her eyes across the candlelit table, seeing something that might have been genuine regret. If I hadn't read her emails, if I didn't know about the money and the apartment and the plans to destroy me, I might have been moved by this apparent change of heart. Instead, I felt only sadness for what we'd lost, and cold determination to protect what remained. You're right, I said. Excitement fades, but loyalty lasts. She reached across the table and took my hand. I want to try again, Ethan. I want us to work. What about Dean? The question hung in the air between us like smoke from the candles. Tessa's grip on my hand tightened slightly, and I saw calculation behind her eyes. Dean is a business partner, nothing more. I see. Do you believe me? I squeezed her hand gently, then released it. I want to. It wasn't exactly a lie. Part of me did want to believe her, wanted to return to the comfortable illusion of our marriage, but wanting something and having it were different things entirely. That night, Tessa initiated intimacy for the first time in months. Her touch was familiar but somehow distant, as if she was going through motions rather than expressing genuine desire. Afterward, she curled against me with her head on my chest, and I felt her tears on my skin. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. I stroked her hair and said nothing. Sorry was just another word, and words had lost their power to heal what was broken between us. But I let her believe her performance had worked. Let her think she'd successfully manipulated me back into complacency. Because while she was playing her game, I was playing a different one entirely, and I was just getting started. The private investigator's report arrived exactly 2 weeks later, delivered to my office in a manila envelope that felt like it contained evidence of my wife's complete betrayal. Which, as it turned out, It did. James Chen had been thorough. Photos of Tessa and Dean entering and leaving the downtown apartment she'd rented with our money. Recordings of their conversations at restaurants and coffee shops, discussing their plans to handle the Ethan situation and start their new life together. Bank records showing she'd opened a separate account and was funneling money from our joint accounts into it. But the most damaging evidence was a video taken 3 days earlier at Dean's gym. Tessa and Dean in an empty workout room. Their conversation clearly audible thanks to Chen's directional microphone. "He's being so weird lately," Tessa was saying, adjusting weights on a machine. "Like he knows something but doesn't want to admit it." "Maybe he's finally growing a spine," Dean replied, spotting her on bench presses. "Took him long enough." "Don't joke about this. If he gets suspicious, what's he going to do? Cry about it? Write you a strongly worded email?" Dean laughed, the sound echoing off the gym walls. "Face it, babe. Your husband is a pushover. He'll believe whatever you tell him because he's too scared to face the truth. He seemed to buy the romantic dinner thing. I think I convinced him I want to work on our marriage." "Good. Keep him distracted while we finalize everything. Once the lease is signed and we've moved the rest of the money, it won't matter what he knows." I watched this exchange 3 times, each viewing adding another layer of rage to the cold fury building in my chest. They weren't just betraying me, they were laughing about it, treating my pain like entertainment. The old Ethan would have confronted them immediately, demanding explanations and apologies. But the old Ethan was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating, someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't emotional satisfaction, it was complete victory. I made copies of everything and stored the originals in a safety deposit box at a different bank. Then I called Patricia Vance and scheduled an emergency meeting. "This is excellent," she said, reviewing the evidence. "With this documentation, we can not only protect your assets, but potentially pursue criminal charges for theft and fraud." "I don't want her in prison," I said. "I want her to understand what she's lost." "Understood. We'll focus on the civil remedies. Asset recovery, spousal support, property division. She's going to be very surprised by how this turns out." My next call was to Mrs. Holman. I'd been thinking about the conversation for weeks, weighing risks and benefits. But recent events had forced my hand. "I need to discuss a career opportunity," I told her. "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind that might require relocating." There was a pause. Mrs. Holman was too smart not to read between the lines. "Personal troubles? You could say that. Come see me tomorrow. We'll talk." That evening, I found Tessa in our bedroom, packing a small suitcase. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "Girls' weekend with Megan and Lana. We're driving up to the lake house. I thought some time away might help me clear my head." Megan Torres and Lana Williams were Tessa's closest friends in the neighborhood, 2 women who'd embraced her transformation from devoted wife to independent woman with enthusiastic support. They'd clapped the loudest at her Instagram posts, sent her the smug little heart emojis when she posted photos of new curtains and a bottle of champagne, and they'd been the ones to tell her, over and over, that life was short and she deserved more than crumbs. They'd sat on her couch on weekdays, wine glasses in hand, and told her the same lines that sound so good in the moment. "Follow your heart. Stop settling for less than you deserve. You're worth so much more than this." They said it like gospel and meant it like gossip, and Tessa drank it in like someone starving at a banquet. "Sounds nice," I said, keeping my voice even. I had learned the hard way that anger needs containment. It does its damage better when engineered rather than vented. "When will you be back?" "Sunday evening, maybe Monday morning," she said, fastening the last zipper of the suitcase she'd been packing for an hour. Careful, practiced motions as if she'd rehearsed this departure a dozen times. The suitcase looked too new, too small for a weekend, the kind people buy when they expect romance and not responsibility. I nodded and began getting ready for bed, performing the small domestic rituals that made the house feel lived in, rinsing a glass, folding a shirt, checking the lock on the back door. In Chen's report, the timeline had been laid out with clinical precision. The dates, the receipts, the screenshots. Everything pointing to a lie. There was no girls' weekend. Dean had rented a cabin in the mountains under the guise of celebrating the lease on their new apartment. He'd paid cash. He'd made reservations. The signs pointed to a romantic weekend, not a getaway with friends. "Have fun," I said as she zipped up her suitcase and straightened the strap. She paused at the bedroom door and looked back at me. For a heartbeat, there was an honest look, something like hesitation, a flicker of the woman I'd married before the years of logistics and compromise had carved their lines into our faces. "Ethan, I love you. You know that, right?" she said, voice low, earnest, as if saying it now might stitch whatever was frayed. "I know you used to. I replied, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. The truth sometimes does that, bites on its way out. Her face shifted as if struck. For a second the practice mask slipped, and I saw confusion, maybe regret. It was enough to make me feel something almost like pity, and then the moment was gone. She straightened, squared her shoulders, and left. I waited until I heard the engine in the driveway and the muffled crunch of gravel as her car pulled away. Only when I was sure she was gone did I call Kevin. "Want to grab a beer?" I asked. "My treat." We met at Murphy's Tavern, a place that still smelled faintly of fryer oil and old beer, where the regulars leaned into the kind of conversation you can't have anywhere else. Kevin listened without interrupting while I laid out the facts. Flat, precise, like I was reading from a brief. The affair, the money moving, the way Dean looked at Tessa like a man who was counting his returns, the lease, the timeline, the receipts. "Jesus," he breathed when I finished. I knew something was off, but this... "I need a favor," I said. "Name it." "Tessa's friends are going to be asking questions when she doesn't come back from this weekend the way she expects. I need people to know what really happened." I kept my voice low. There was no melodrama in the ask, only logistics. Reputation works like dominoes. Once the first falls, the rest follow. Kevin studied my face under the dim bar light, the kind of quiet look friends give when weighing whether to take the risk with you. "What are you planning?" he asked finally. "Justice," I said. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now." I sipped my beer and watched the condensation bead and run down the glass, thinking in practical increments. The plan didn't need theatrics. It needed airtight steps, legal cover, and an audience that could corroborate what happened when Tessa returned. He drained his glass and signaled for another round. "What do you need me to do?" I explained the small things first. Call texts to neighbors if she didn't return on schedule, be visible at the HOA meeting so questions would be natural and not orchestrated, pass along facts discreetly if people asked. Kevin nodded. He was that kind of man who would stand at a barbecue and tell the truth if someone tried to rewrite it. Then came execution. I moved with the cold, mechanical focus that grief and betrayal had sharpened in me. Phase 1 was practical. Secure the house and the assets so a surprise didn't become a theft in plain sight. Since my name was on the deed and mortgage, I changed the locks, legally, quietly, calling the locksmith and arranging for a standard cylinder swap. The locksmith asked questions, and I gave him answers that were mundane. There's a kind of power in mundanity when you're trying to make the extraordinary seem ordinary. I had cameras installed too, strategically covering the front door, the back door, and the driveway. The model I chose wasn't flashy, just reliable, motion-triggered, cloud-backed, because I was installing evidence, not theater. The installer, an efficient young man with a tattooed forearm and no patience for chit-chat, drilled and mounted the cams while I hovered just enough to check sight lines. The red LED glowed faintly, promise and proof in miniature. Next, I went to the bank with Patricia's documents folded neatly in my hand. "We're placing a hold pending legal review," I said to the manager, and the manager, after scanning the paperwork, nodded with professional sympathy. They froze the joint accounts and flagged any transfers above a modest amount. It was nothing dramatic. No alarms, no handcuffs. Just a clamp that would slow any attempt at a quick, clean financial divorce. The teller printed the forms and stamped them. The stamp felt like a small victory. I also cataloged what had been taken, if anything. Receipts, photographs, emails. I printed thumbnails from Chen's report and placed them in manila folders, labeled and dated. I printed the lease, Dean's payment confirmations, the travel booking for the cabin. I organized hotel receipts and bank transfers into a tidy evidentiary chain. Date, source, destination. Proof is a patient thing. It waits while tantrums burn out. All of it done within hours, a series of small, unromantic acts that together formed a net. Finally, I prepared the specific surprise for her homecoming. It wasn't dramatic, no banners, no confrontation. It was precision. A neighbor on the porch, a casually overheard comment from a friend who'd happened to stop by, and cameras that would show her trying to get back in and failing. The truth, exposed calmly and incontrovertibly, is more humiliating than any shout. Sunday evening arrived with a low sky and a shallow chill that hinted at rain. I sat in the living room with the house quiet around me, the hum of the security system a soft, constant comfort. I could hear a twig snap outside and the distant sound of tires, then the familiar staccato of a key in the front door. Tessa returned, glowing, as predicted, the kind of walk people have after a romantic weekend. Shoulders softer, a lightness in the step. From the window, I watched her lift the key, insert it, and turn. The door didn't open. She tried again, the motion becoming brisker. then frantic, then bewildered. She backed up, pulling the key free, examining it like a person checking a prop that doesn't fit the stage. She tried it a third time at the knob, then checked the handle, then the deadbolt, as if the world, in its smallness, had simply failed her. On the porch, the neighbor, Kevin, stood and called over in a voice that made the moment casual. "Trouble with the lock, Tess?" His timing was flawless, the offhand question perfectly designed to sound like neighborly concern rather than premeditated theater. She looked up at him, then at the porch light, and her smile faltered. The tiny rehearsal she must have run in her head for how this night would go: open the door, drop the suitcase, laugh about the weather, skipped a beat. Inside, I could hear the faint rustle as cameras recorded her motions, as the security system logged the timestamps. Outside, the neighbors were suddenly present in small groups at their own doors, coffee mugs in hand, the kind of incidental witnesses that make stories stick. Tessa's key slipped from her fingers and clattered on the welcome mat. She looked helpless for a moment, like someone realizing that a script she'd been handed no longer had her name in it. I stood at the window and watched her, not with triumph, but with the cool, focused satisfaction of a man who'd made arrangements to catch the truth when it returned home. The suitcase at her feet, the new curtains, the wine bottle with the neck still warm from being poured, looked absurd in the harsh light of the porch. It was the last of the props. She looked over her shoulder at the neighbors, at Kevin, and then, slowly, back at the front door. Her face was a study in small, incremental panic. First confusion, then anger where anger could be useful, and finally the brittle, practiced calm of someone who expects an exit strategy. The sound of the locks clicking in the background, the mechanical, indifferent noise, seemed louder somehow, a punctuation mark at the end of an equation. She reached for her phone and made a call with hands that weren't steady. I flipped off the lamp and let the house breathe in the dark, a predator satisfied with a clean catch. The cameras would have the rest: timestamps, angles, a precise record of her attempts to re-enter the life she'd been dismantling. The legal narrative was being written in pixels and paper and witnesses. She would have to explain why she couldn't get into her own house. She would have to explain to her friends why she stood on the porch, fumbling with a key that didn't work. She would have to answer the question the neighbors were already asking in whispers. Why didn't anyone know she was leaving? Phase 1 had been small, meticulous, and unromantic. Change the locks, secure the accounts, document the theft. But justice is often an accumulation of small acts, and by the time she stepped back into the world that evening, the scaffolding that had supported her story had been quietly removed. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my wife standing on her own front porch, suitcase in hand, looking confused and slightly annoyed. "The lock's not working," she said. "No, it's working fine. I changed it." "You what?" "Changed the locks. For security reasons." I could see her mind racing, trying to process this unexpected development. "Ethan, what's going on?" "Why don't you come in? We need to talk." I stepped aside, and she entered cautiously, like she was walking into unfamiliar territory, which in a way she was. The living room had been rearranged. Her personal items, photos, books, decorative objects, were neatly packed in boxes stacked against one wall. The coffee table held a manila folder thick with documents. "What is all this?" she demanded. "Have a seat." "I'll stand, thanks." "Suit yourself." I opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph. Tessa and Dean entering the downtown apartment. "Nice place. Very modern." Her face went white. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" I showed her the next photo, then the next. "You've been busy while I was being too emotional." "Ethan, I can explain. No need. It's all very clear." I pulled out the bank statements showing the transferred money. $37,000. That's what it cost to rent your love nest and plan my destruction. She sank into a chair, her composure finally cracking. "How long have you known?" "Long enough?" "Are you going to divorce me?" "That depends." "On what?" I leaned forward, meeting her eyes with the cold stare I'd been practicing. "On whether you're smart enough to make this easy or stupid enough to make it hard." For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Tessa looked genuinely frightened. The confident, independent woman who'd been planning to discard me like an old appliance was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand the magnitude of her miscalculation. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Everything you took, plus interest." "I don't have it." "Then you'd better figure out how to get it." I stood up, leaving the photos and documents scattered on the coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. "Your boxes are by the door. The guest room is available if you need a place to stay while you consider your options. But the master bedroom is off limits." "This is my house, too." "Actually, it's not. Check the deed, my name, my credit, my down payment. You're a guest here, and guests follow house rules. I started toward the stairs, then paused. Oh, and Tessa, your boyfriend might want to find a new gym. I hear the current management is about to get some very interesting information about what goes on in their private workout rooms. I left her sitting in the wreckage of her carefully laid plans, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal, finally understanding that the emotional, needy husband she'd discarded had been replaced by someone much more dangerous, someone who played to win. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare, though I prefer to think of it as applied consequences. Tessa had spent months treating our marriage like a game, so I decided to show her what happened when someone better at games decided to play. She moved into the guest room, as I'd suggested, but the house felt like a battlefield with clearly drawn lines. I controlled the main living spaces, the kitchen, and most importantly, the financial resources. She had a bedroom and bathroom, plus the growing realization that her carefully planned escape route had been cut off. The first casualty was her relationship with Dean. I'd sent copies of Chen's surveillance footage to the owner of Dean's gym, along with a detailed explanation of how his facility was being used for extramarital affairs and financial planning sessions. The gym owner, a family man with strong opinions about adultery, terminated Dean's membership and banned him from the premises. But that was just the opening move. Dean worked as a personal trainer, building his client base through the gym's referral system and social media presence. When potential clients started receiving anonymous messages containing screenshots of his conversations about manipulating married women and stealing their husbands' money, his business began evaporating. I didn't send those messages, of course. That would be harassment, but information has a way of spreading when it reaches the right people, and I'd become very good at identifying the right people. Tessa's social circle was the next target. Megan and Lana had been enthusiastic supporters of her affair, encouraging her to follow her heart and stop settling for less. They'd helped her rationalize the betrayal, provided alibis for her secret meetings, and generally served as enablers for her destruction of our marriage. They deserved to understand the full scope of what they'd been supporting. The neighborhood book club met every Thursday at rotating houses, and this week it was Megan's turn to host. I knew this because Tessa had been complaining about missing it due to our situation. What she didn't know was that I'd prepared a special presentation for the group. Kevin's wife, Sandra, was a book club member, and she'd agreed to help me deliver some important information to the other wives. Nothing dramatic or confrontational, just copies of the bank statements showing how much money Tessa had stolen, along with transcripts of her conversations about manipulating me and planning my financial destruction. I thought they should know what kind of person they've been taking advice from, Sandra explained to the group, according to Kevin's report. Some of them have been having marital problems of their own, and Tessa's been encouraging them to follow her example. The reaction was swift and decisive. By Friday morning, Tessa had been removed from the book club, the neighborhood social committee, and the Halloween block party planning group. Her former friends weren't just disappointed, they were angry at being deceived and used. Megan confronted Tessa in our driveway Saturday morning, their raised voices carrying clearly through my home office window. "You lied to us," Megan shouted. "You made us accessories to stealing from your husband." "It's not stealing," Tessa protested. "It's marital property." $37,000 moved to secret accounts? That's theft, Tessa, and you made us help you cover it up. I never asked you to. You asked us to lie for you, to provide alibis, to support your affair while you robbed your husband blind. Do you have any idea how that makes us look? The argument continued for several minutes, but the outcome was predetermined. Tessa's support network was collapsing as her former friends realized they'd been manipulated and used, but the real confrontation was yet to come. Dean finally worked up the courage to visit our house on Sunday evening, probably hoping to salvage something from the wreckage of his relationship with Tessa. I watched from the kitchen window as his ridiculous Mustang pulled into our driveway, music thumping loud enough to annoy the neighbors. He strutted up to our front door like he owned the place, which was ironic considering he'd been planning to take ownership through Tessa's divorce settlement. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Dean Pritchard in all his gym-sculpted glory, tank top, designer jeans, enough cologne to fumigate a small building. He was trying to project confidence, but I could see uncertainty in his eyes. "We need to talk," he announced. "No, we don't. Look, man, this whole thing got out of hand. Maybe we can work something out." "What kind of something?" "Tessa made some mistakes, but she's trying to fix them. If you could just what? Pretend I didn't see you planning to destroy my life? Ignore the money you helped her steal? Forget about the apartment you rented with my savings?" Dean's facade of reasonableness began cracking. "She's not happy with you, man. Hasn't been for a long time. Maybe it's time to accept that and move on." You're right about one thing. It is time to move on. I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. Dean was bigger than me, more muscled, probably thought he could intimidate me if the conversation turned physical. But intimidation only works when the target cares about avoiding confrontation. Here's what's going to happen, I said, keeping my voice conversational. You're going to stay away from my wife, my house, and my neighborhood. You're going to find a new gym, new clients, and a new girlfriend who isn't married to someone else. Or what? Or I'll make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are. Your clients, your family, your neighbors, your future employers. I'll document every lie you've told, every law you've broken, every marriage you've helped destroy. You can't prove anything. I pulled out my phone and played a snippet of his recorded conversation with Tessa about manipulating me and stealing my money. His face went pale as he heard his own voice describing me as a pushover who was too scared to face the truth. I can prove everything, I said. The question is whether you're smart enough to disappear quietly or stupid enough to make me prove it publicly. Dean stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to reconcile this version of Ethan with the weak, emotional husband he'd been expecting. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its aggressive edge. What about Tessa? What about her? She's in love with me. No, she's in love with the idea of you. The excitement, the rebellion, the escape from responsibility. But that's not sustainable, and deep down she knows it. You don't know her like I do. I know her better than you ever will. I know she gets anxious when the bills are late, that she needs security more than adventure, that she's terrified of being alone. You represent temporary excitement, but I represent permanent stability. Then why is she leaving you? She's not. The words hung in the air between us. Dean looked confused, like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. She told me. She told you what you wanted to hear, just like she told me what I wanted to hear. The difference is, I stopped believing her. I could see him processing this, beginning to understand that he'd been played as thoroughly as I had. Tessa hadn't been choosing between two men. She'd been using both of us for different purposes, planning to discard whichever one became inconvenient. You're lying, he said, but without conviction. Ask her yourself. Ask her if she's ready to give up the house, the neighborhood, the social status, the financial security. Ask her if she's prepared to build a life with a personal trainer whose client base just evaporated. Dean's confidence was crumbling visibly. She loves me. She loves what you represent, but love isn't enough to pay rent or maintain her lifestyle, and without my money funding your adventure, reality is going to set in very quickly. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so the neighbors wouldn't overhear. Here's some free advice. Find a woman who isn't married, someone who can choose you without destroying someone else's life. Someone who doesn't come with $37,000 in stolen money and a husband who's very good at playing long-term games. Dean looked toward the house, probably hoping to see Tessa watching from a window, ready to defend their relationship and validate his assumptions about her commitment. But the windows were dark, and no rescue was coming. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, it is. He walked back to his Mustang with less swagger than he'd arrived with, and I watched him drive away, knowing he wouldn't be back. Men like Dean were predators who targeted easy prey. I was no longer easy prey. Inside the house, I found Tessa waiting in the living room, her face pale and drawn. I heard voices, she said. Dean stopped by to say goodbye. Goodbye? He's moving on. Found someone new, apparently. Someone without complications. It was a lie, but a believable one. Tessa's face crumpled as she absorbed the implication that her great love affair had ended with her being abandoned for a simpler option. That's not... He wouldn't... Wouldn't what? Choose someone easier? Someone who doesn't come with an angry husband and financial problems? She sank into a chair, the weight of her situation finally becoming clear. Dean was gone. Her friends had turned against her, her money was frozen, and her husband had transformed from victim to adversary. What happens now? She whispered. I sat across from her, studying the woman I'd married 12 years ago. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the collapse of her carefully constructed fantasy. Now we negotiate. For what? For the rest of your life. The negotiation took place in our living room on a Tuesday evening in late October, with Halloween decorations visible through the windows and the sound of neighborhood children playing in the distance. It felt appropriate somehow, a night traditionally associated with masks and pretense, when people revealed hidden aspects of themselves. Patricia Vance sat beside me with a briefcase full of legal documents, while Tessa faced us from across the coffee table with her own attorney. A nervous young man who'd clearly never handled a case quite like this one. Let's begin with the assets. Patricia said, opening her folder. The house is solely in Mr. Garvey's name, purchased before the marriage with his individual credit and down payment. Mrs. Garvey has no legal claim to the property. Tessa's lawyer started to object, but Patricia continued smoothly. The joint savings account, from which Mrs. Garvey withdrew $37,000 without her husband's knowledge or consent, represents marital property that was converted for individual use. Under Ohio law, this constitutes marital waste and affects the overall asset division. My client was preparing to leave an unhappy marriage, the young lawyer protested. She needed resources to establish independent housing. Your client was funding an extramarital affair and planning to defraud her husband of his property, Patricia replied. We have extensive documentation of her activities, including recorded conversations about manipulating Mr. Garvey and stealing his assets. She placed a stack of photographs and transcripts on the table. Tessa's face went white as she recognized the evidence of her betrayal laid out in black and white. Furthermore, Patricia continued, Mrs. Garvey's systematic deception, adultery, and financial misconduct constitute grounds for an at-fault divorce, which significantly impacts spousal support and asset distribution. The negotiation continued for 2 hours, with Tessa's position growing weaker as each piece of evidence was presented. The apartment lease signed with stolen money, the secret bank account, the recorded conversations about destroying me financially, the documented lies and manipulations. By the end, the settlement terms were clear. Tessa would receive minimal spousal support for 6 months, enough to establish basic housing and employment. She would return every penny of the stolen money, plus interest and legal fees. She would have no claim to the house, the retirement accounts, or any assets acquired during the marriage. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges for theft and fraud. This is hardly equitable, her lawyer objected weakly. Equity assumes good faith on both parties, Patricia replied. Your client forfeited any claim to equitable treatment when she chose deception and theft over honest communication. Tessa signed the papers with shaking hands, her dreams of a fresh start with my money reduced to a 6-month transition period and a hard lesson in consequences. After the lawyers left, we sat in silence for several minutes. The house felt different now. No longer a shared space, but my space, with her as a temporary guest working toward departure. I never meant for it to go this far, she said finally. Yes, you did? You planned every step. I mean, I never meant to hurt you. You meant to destroy me. The only thing you regret is that it didn't work. She looked around the living room, taking in the photos and memories of our life together. What happened to us, Ethan? We used to be happy. We used to pretend to be happy. There's a difference. I did love you. Past tense noted. I still do, in a way. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine emotion beneath the calculated performance. No, you don't. You love the security I represented, the lifestyle I provided, the social status that came with being my wife, but you never loved me. That's not true. Then why did you try to destroy me instead of simply asking for a divorce? She had no answer for that, because there was no answer that didn't reveal the depth of her selfishness and cruelty. I made mistakes, she said eventually. You made choices. Every step was deliberate. So what happens now? Do we just end? We ended months ago. This is just the paperwork? She nodded, accepting the finality of it. Will you ever forgive me? Forgiveness implies that what you did was forgivable. Some things aren't. Everyone deserves a second chance. You used up your second chance when you chose to steal from me instead of talking to me, and your third chance when you chose to plan my destruction instead of asking for help. By my count, you're well past the point where chances matter. Tessa stood up, smoothing her dress in a gesture I'd seen thousands of times during our marriage. I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow. Good. Will you tell people what really happened? When they ask about the divorce? I'll tell them we grew apart, that we wanted different things. I'll let you keep your dignity, even though you didn't extend the same courtesy to me. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I'm not the kind of person who destroys others for entertainment. She flinched at the implication, recognizing her own behavior reflected back at her. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said. I already have. What's that? Peace? 2 weeks later, I stood in the driveway watching Tessa load the last of her belongings into a rental truck. She'd found a small apartment across town, taken a job with a marketing firm that paid half what her consulting business had generated, and begun the process of rebuilding her life from the wreckage of her choices. Kevin appeared beside me, carrying 2 cups of coffee. How are you holding up? He asked. Better than expected. Any regrets? I considered the question while watching my wife of 12 years drive away from the life we'd built together. Only that it took me so long to see who she really was. Think you'll miss her? I'll miss who I thought she was, but that person never existed. Kevin nodded, understanding the distinction. So what's next? Mrs. Holman offered me a promotion, regional manager position based in Denver. Fresh start, better salary, new challenges. You taking it? Already accepted. When do you leave? After the first of the year. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood kids prepare for Halloween. The decorations were elaborate this year, each house trying to outdo the others in creative displays of seasonal spirit. You know, Kevin said, for a while there, I thought you might do something crazy, when you found out about the affair and the money. Like what? I don't know. Something dramatic. Vengeful. I did do something vengeful. What's that? I let her face the consequences of her choices. Kevin laughed. That's not revenge, man. That's just justice. Sometimes they're the same thing. That evening, I walked through the empty house, taking inventory of what remained. The furniture we'd chosen together, the photos from happier times, the accumulated possessions of a shared life. Most of it would go into storage or be donated. I was starting over, and starting over meant traveling light. In my home office, I found the notebook where I'd tracked Tessa's lies and deceptions over the past few months. Pages of dates, times, contradictions, and evidence. The careful documentation of a marriage's destruction. I threw it in the trash. I didn't need it anymore. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I hope you're happy. You destroyed everything. Dean, apparently, making one last attempt at shifting blame. I deleted the message without responding. Some people never learned that actions had consequences, that choices mattered, that you couldn't build happiness on someone else's destruction. But I had learned. The hard way, but thoroughly. I poured a glass of wine and sat in my living room, surrounded by the quiet emptiness of a house that was finally, truly mine. Outside, the October wind rustled through the trees on Autumn Drive, carrying the promise of winter and the possibility of spring beyond that. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Contentment. Not the desperate happiness I'd chased during my marriage, but the deeper satisfaction that comes from surviving betrayal with dignity intact. Tessa had been wrong about one thing. I wasn't too emotional, too needy, too focused on feelings. I was exactly emotional enough to recognize when emotions were being weaponized against me, exactly needy enough to understand when my needs weren't being met, exactly focused enough on feelings to know when they were being manipulated. The man she'd discarded as weak had proven stronger than she'd imagined. The husband she'd tried to destroy had emerged victorious. The marriage she'd sacrificed for excitement had given way to something better, self-respect. I raised my glass to the empty room, toasting the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Tomorrow I would start packing for Denver. But tonight I would simply sit in the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve, listening to the wind and planning for a future that belonged entirely to me. The game was over. I had won. And winning, I discovered, felt exactly like justice should.